This week on Content Minded, I am joined by two very special women who I consider friends to give their own very unique perspectives on a number of topics that are pertinent to the current order of things we are living under in this digital, online, or some will say extremely online reality that we're living in. Helena and Default Friend both have their own stories which have led them to this cultural moment, to pick apart various aspects of what it means to be someone engaged in the development of the online world from its early iterations till now. In this episode, we discuss what some would consider the, quote, subaltern groups of the online world, the femcel, the incel, but particularly the experiences and the unique embodiments of young and, well, starting to not be so young, women and men everywhere, given their relation to particular forms of media, Tumblr culture, the online world in regards to one's identity, and various issues that they have with groups that have been propped up in response to various mainstream narratives of distorting and experimenting with one's own subjectivity. For example, there is a critique of radfems and the quote-unquote trads. But there are some very unique and interesting points that my listeners will not exactly expect from the two women I am joined by. But all in all, all three of us, have an understanding, I feel, of the unique online moment that we are experiencing. Join us for a nice discussion about things that perhaps maybe just are commented upon too much, but maybe perhaps are significant enough and worthy enough to be spoken of. Be, because Kino and Nectar can flow at intervals, right? Like it doesn't matter. So why are you guys looking at me all awkward like that? Oh my god.
I was looking at you.
No, I'm kidding. So so today, totally, very serious subject matter we're gonna cover. No, but anyway, so introduction. I usually do pre-recorded introductions because it's awkward when you have to pretend that there's an audience, it's just us, right? So today, I have two lovely, beautiful women that I think. Oh man, I'm just ruining it as I go. I'm ruining it in my mind. So anyway, like, share, subscribe. Oh no, anyways. Um the reason I wanted to do this, and originally I planned, and we will get to the femcel question, but because we were talking about the particular proclivities of femcels, but the reason I wanted to talk to you too is I feel that, like, in some weird ways, as like self-aggrandizing and as like pretentious as this sounds, I feel that all three of us are on the precipice of a certain particular cultural moment that might have lasting implications in the online world, but also in real life. And I think that in some weird ways, I mean, the word victim is kind of like a very charged and like almost misnomer word, because I believe what Sartre said once, where he said that inevitably victim and perpetrator cross into each other eventually, right? This is what Nina Power said in her book. She quoted Sartre. But I think that all three of us in some ways have also been, I wouldn't say victim, but I would say subject of very particular developments in culture in the online world. And I feel like all of us have come out the other side in our own, like, sort of unique ways and our own unique approaches to it, right? And I feel like, and so the thing with Content Mind is I always wanted to allow for the sort of vulnerability of allowing yourself to have that space to admit that, when you pull back we're all subject to this we're all subject to it. We all perpetrate it. We're all sort of in our unique place. And so I feel a good way to start off, and maybe I'll start off with Helena, because my audience is very familiar with Default. But that's no, don't worry. Yeah, she's always she's always gets passed aside. She's just the default friend. Right? But to start off with Helena, I feel that let's sort of talk about our like your unique experiences. Then we'll get into other issues because, for example, recently I read your. I finally got around to reading your marquee Substack, with that went into brutal. I do mean brutal detail about your experiences and your detransition story. And before I allow you to speak, the, you shall obey. Anyway, no. The one part that really got to me, because I'm a cat person, was you talked about going home, and you were in the outs with your parents, and your cat. I think your cat was called Puff. Was it Puff?
Yeah.
Yeah. That really broke that like that. That got to me. I hate to say that really got to me when you were describing how your cat Puff would curl up to you, and it was like you were seeing your cat for the last time. That for some reason that particular part really got to me. But anyways, I guess without further ado, Helena, you have been a sort of leading voice in a very particular community, and you were recently on Tucker Carlson. I think you can speak to a very unique situation that has been wrought upon young women in particular, because this is what this stream is. And I can just hear my audience tuning out right now when I say this stream is about young women. But but no, it's very interesting. We have to understand this. We have to. So I don't. But the thing is, I know you've told your story enough. I don't want to get that. The sort of like I have to do the greatest hits thing. I'm on another podcast.
Yeah.
I want this to be unique and different. So the one thing I feel that was left, like sort of from your interviews and your Substack, that wasn't elaborated on, was the very unique sort of content you were consuming in the days when you were exploring, for lack of a better term, exploring your own gender identity. What were the particular themes and what were the particular contents that you were consuming that I know, like, because Tumblr is a nebulous thing, but what particular aspect of Tumblr and other things like guided you down to quote Mersheimer with that one country in the, Eastern Europe, guided you down the primrose path towards, the rest is history, of course, but yeah.
Right. So it's obviously a convergence of things like Tumblr, which is pretty much the only social media site I was using, and I was using it like all the time, 24/7. It's got a lot of different stuff on there, but one of the things, which is I think what you were kind of leading up to, that I've been talking about a lot more recently, is the just extreme presence and impact of like male fan fiction on Tumblr. And that's something that I think a lot of like other detransitioners don't talk about, even ones who I know personally because they've talked to me about it. I know that was a part of their life, but it's really embarrassing. So
we're here to explore the embarrassing. So
yeah, I'm, like I said recently, I am here to flay my psychology publicly for science. So I'm open to talking about it, but it is something that it's really impactful. It's something that is, it's intensely emotional. It's intensely relational. It can be intensely erotic as well. And so it's this like relationship that a lot of young females are having with this content online that's just really ticking so many boxes of like the human experience. And then this relationship to this content is then shrouded in this ecosystem of messages that are all kind of pointing you towards this direction of like, you're not a girl, all of these things that you're feeling, they're all signs that you're not a girl. You need to become non-binary, you need to become a boy. And that's something that I think is like more than anything else for girls like me who kind of fit this archetype of like shy, weird, socially isolated, loner, straight girl online who becomes trans. Like, I think it's a type, and it's a major section of the girls, but it's just something that like nobody's talking about.
Yeah. I think before we proceed, I wanted to ask you about that, but I think before we proceed, one thing, I guess, in terms of journalistic clarity, and I think when we get into more heavier stuff, I'll probably end up paywalling it. But that's, really personal stuff. For example, my interview with Matt Forney got pretty personal. But I think that in terms of journalistic integrity, I wanted to address two things. One is that I think the reason I love talking to you two is that I don't want to do the typical like exploitation, I'm plumbing into the depths sort of thing, because I realize that in my position, I'm also a product of like our own internet, extremely online age. And I feel like, but on the other end, I think I want to contextualize this into actual proper thinking around it rather than just catharsis, right? Because both extremes have their own detriment. So I don't want to come off like I'm exploiting you guys, or I'm like, oh, this is good content because now the grody femcels are confessing. Ugh. Like, that's not my intention. But also another thing that I feel I have to address, and maybe I can ask you this personally, Helena, do you feel like you've become like this poster child, and that, these evil, hateful, conservative bigots are using your sort of experience to, lead the charge against the culture war sort of deal? And that's another thing. I think, like, as much as I love to engage in culture war, I feel that, that has limitations as well. And that's something that I personally don't want to do, because I like to get at people in terms of their, deeper thoughts and experiences, rather than, Helena becomes instrumentalized in my own personal culture war game. So, but do you feel that, like, do you feel that that conservatives in particular, in the conservative media that you've been on, they've sort of used you? Or do you feel that even if they have used you, that perhaps it's all for a noble cause, even if there is that wink, wink, nod, nod, she's our girl right now sort of deal? Like, I hope I'm not making it too gratuitous, but
no. I mean, to an extent, I mean, that's something that I think obviously comes with the territory when like I am involved in something as political as like the gender issues are. But I also, like, I made the choice of my own volition to do the media things that I've done. And I do it with like a theory of what it's going to accomplish behind my decisions. So I don't feel like I'm just, some person who's been wronged and in pain and emotionally a mess, and then people are descending upon me and just using my story for their own purpose. Like, I've done a lot of work to get to a place where emotionally I feel like I can interact with certain media figures or institutions and not be giving up more than I planned to. And that it's an exchange. And I feel like when I do these media things, it's not just to like share my story or whatever. I don't really care that much about sharing my story. I actually don't really like doing it. But it's like, I'm actually trying to reach like parents, because like my whole theory about this gender stuff is like the political stuff. Like, I don't know, that will sort itself out. I'm not a political person, but I do care about how this is impacting families. And I think that like every family like has to fend for themselves and has to take care of their own kids. And if they can be alerted to something that's going on, or see that, something really is a phenomenon, it's not just their family, and then find better resources to help them take care of their family through, like, I always kind of shout out stuff like GenSpect, which is an organization that I'm a part of that actually puts parents in contact with resources and stuff like that. Like, that's really my goal that I'm trying to do. And I think that doing something like, Tucker Carlson, like, that's going to reach millions of families and millions of parents who have their own kids who maybe they don't understand how embedded this is in the internet or how embedded this is in the school system. So like, that's my goal and where I'm coming from. And so while I don't think that Fox News as a company is just like having me on there to be nice and to share my story, they're obviously,
Obviously, there's yeah, there's
yeah,
let's not kid ourselves.
exactly,
You
exactly,
know, and then hey,
exactly.
and listen, and the thing is, like, I'm kind of like, I'm iffy myself about doing this because I am, of course, someone on the political right. I rub shoulders with some very far right people, and so I feel like. But aside from that, I feel like I'm sufficiently open enough to explore these different things. But I do feel almost cagey about, like, oh my god, that now my friends are gonna get canned because like they're associating with me. But then it's like, what are you gonna do? I feel. But anyway, sorry I cut you off, Helena. Go ahead. Yeah, we all know Fox News has an agenda there. Come on, that's like,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that's obvious.
And I mean, everyone has their own agenda, but I'm talking about something that I care about, and you know, I want to talk about it, and I make my own choices. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and I feel like as we talk, I mean, inevitably is going to the detransition thing will come up, but I feel like I wanted to talk about things other than that. I wanted to talk about like the femcel thing. So and I want to get back without you, but the lovely default friend has been waiting so long. So maybe so default now unmute yourself. You've come out of content prison right now.
Content prison.
women should be seen and, well, actually seen instead of
It
heard.
was I was thankful for I was thankful for the reprieve there because it's very like loud outside, so I was like, I should lock the door. I don't know, it's people having social fun outside of this office, so I just wanted to make sure I wasn't invited.
Oh, you shall know your place.
Locking myself in this bizarre room.
So I guess, so yeah, maybe comment on what we talked about, but also specifically on the sort of the particular type, because a lot of your content is very heavily focused on the original Tumblr culture that inspired, or rather, well, for good and especially for bad, the sort of millions upon millions of young women in particular. I mean, we all know the story about Chan culture and influencing young men of my particular generation. But so maybe if you can comment on what Helena was saying, and we could go on from there. So,
yeah, I mean, I think that Helena's mission to talk to parents is really important because, I liked Abigail Schreier's book Irreversible Damage, but it just didn't. It's impossible to know what it's like and to educate parents on that situation unless you really understand digital culture or you've been in it yourself. And a lot of the content that comes out of that and with that intention is, I mean, it's good, and I think that they're trying to do something noble, but they don't get it. There's like it's sort of like, like warning. It's like kind of like satanic panic, like, and I sympathize with people who look at someone like Abigail Schreier and say, well, she's transphobic and, burn it all down. I don't think that's true. I think in some ways she's too permissive, and then in other ways it's just very like she just does it. She's just not on the ground, and that's not her fault. It's really complicated to understand. And I think it's very dangerous to say that it amplifies friction between mothers and daughters that's already there, and adding this veneer of like a medically approved, you don't get me, you're abusing me, especially when the culture is encouraging teenagers to perceive their parents as emotionally abusive when they, at worst are typically just incompetent, right?
Right.
And drawing those boundaries and making those distinctions is vital. I think there's a real anti-family message. Speaking of sounding like Fox News, right? And I don't mean that in a propagandistic way. Teenagers tell other teenagers, like, your parents, go behind their back, and inject yourself with this and that. I don't see any meaningful difference between the way that hormones are sort of illegally smuggled among teenagers and often from adults to teenagers, than the way like people were sharing opiates in my high school. And again, it's not the same. It's not totally the same, but the mechanisms of hiding things. And, I remember clear as day, there's a kid in my grade who was like, people exaggerate the dangers of dope, and it's not really a big deal and whatever. And, that's all fine and good. And you get away with that for so long, and then one day you overdose and you die, and like maybe you shouldn't have been snorting heroin. And you know, it's again not the same sort of one for one example, but I think sort of this they don't know me, they don't get it, I'm going to do what I want kind of attitude.
You can't understand a junkie's mind, tries with your books and degrees, to quote Alice in Chains. That's But I think, but the mechanism is obviously different in that it's like, well, there is an identity issue when it comes to addiction, I feel. Like there is sort of a crass romanticization of it, especially, I think it was more prevalent among Gen Xers and millennials. I mean, it still is prevalent among Zoomers with like mumble rap or whatever, but like, you know, the sort of druggy, like, you know, trash outsider culture was like very prominent. But I feel like it's different in that now you've taken an identity issue and you've taken an issue of sort of the politicization of being itself. And now you've put that into the context of youth rebellion, which in some ways was always the case, at least from the 60s onwards. I mean, even before that, I mean, there were occult movements that had that similar vibe in the 19th, 18th century. But I feel that nowadays it seems that there is, it's coded similarly in that there's this network of like sharing the drugs among each other, hip teachers giving you your first, Helena, you wrote about how like the utterly lax medical system. You were taking T levels that, not even bodybuilders take. Like that was insane. Like that's, but there is parallels there. So sorry, I cut you off, Default, or yeah.
No. Yeah, I mean, I think there's parallels. You're right. It's not the same. There's a civil rights dynamic to it.
Right.
But I think the thing that sort of undergirds it, which is, not only are my parents stupid, but they're actively, they're oppressing me somehow. There's a form of abuse. I think that's what's similar, and that's what I think is like really sort of, underappreciated about this problem, and that maybe parents like don't understand it, and especially if you don't know what's influencing your children to think this way. And again, not to do my like shit lib thing that I always do. I mean, it doesn't mean that there aren't people who are trans or there aren't people who are gay. I mean, like obviously there are, but it's just I think people don't really understand the way fandom impacts your mind either.
I think
the other the other piece of this is like taking at face value someone who says One Direction is my religion and I am literally going to marry Harry Styles. I mean, and like it's just so impossible to understand that there's people who say this seriously, but they're also 14, so it's like
yeah, we were all there. Yeah.
Or with the shipping question, a woman was recently telling me how her 16-year-old trans-identified daughter wrote like a 15-page manifesto for a school assignment about how Destiel from Supernatural is like real, and anybody who denies it is just homophobic. And this is a girl who thinks she's a boy, and she feels so passionately. Like she wrote this like whole essay about how like it's a conspiracy, like the show writers, like they know that like the ship is real, but they don't want to admit it because like the society is too homophobic or whatever. Like this, like genuinely kind of like schizo 16-year-old girl brain.
Like I can't say the full name on YouTube, but the Q only for teenage girls. That's kind of like,
Pretty much.
But I think before we get to the femcel stuff, the real heart of it to me, I mean, and more brilliant people than me have talked about this, I mean, Yerk has had multiple threads on Twitter about this. The real question to me, I think, is the ontological question of the affirmation of this is your sort of inscribed identity that you speak into existence, that there is a basis for that within your own being. Or is it rather the more of the conservative, quote unquote, for lack of a better term, satanic panic narrative, which is this is something that is a product of inculcation and propaganda that is tricking young women in particular? Because statistically, we know that this sort of rise in Zoomer alternative genders and gender ambiguities mostly comes from young women. I mean, there's still gay men, there are still trans men, but there is a huge growth in the young woman being subject to this. So the question to me, I think, will always be, and this is one that will never sort of, I don't think in our lifetime will ever be solved between the political divide, like the, political camps, is that, the one end, it's like, it's perfectly natural, it's real, or rather it becomes naturalized through the process of exploration, which is the progressive trans affirming, or it's rather, this is a product of propaganda, and this is something that is evil. This is something that is violating the sort of citadel of the self that is inscribed to us by either God or nature or another sort of, I mean, even secular people who are political, right? Like this, some HBD, whatever, right? Like some kind of evolutionary advantage to having sexual dimorphism. But you know what I mean? Like, I hope I'm making sense with that. Like, it seems that there's that impermeable divide between the two narratives of how this issue has come about, right? Like, yeah. I don't know if you two have any thoughts about that. I mean, that's a very deep question, but yeah.
I mean, I think like with like Slash in particular, a lot of people, the first time they come across it, they're put off by it or they think it's gross. And then they see it so many times that they start to like it. It's kind of like, I mean, it functions like porn, right? Mm-hmm. Like first you're like, whoa, what? And then you're like, actually, yeah, like male on male in the context of the, supernatural universe is kind of hot. That's going to be clipped and taken out of context. I do not believe that.
Don't bleep the in part.
The I word.
The I word. But I say zest at the, like those porn sites, they try to skip the legalities of it by putting in zest. Oh my God. What the hell?
Not my brother. But
not my sister, not my mother, not my brother.
Showing too many of my cards. But
we're just telling on ourselves right now.
Look, I've been asked to write about this stuff so many times. I've read every study in existence.
I've share it because I wanted to do this mega article on that particular issue of pornography, and I've been afraid for 2 years now. I've been afraid to write it.
You shouldn't be. It's crazy. Yeah. I mean, not to go on a tangent, but there's no conclusive evidence of anything. Just anything, which is a crazy part. But anyway, but the point is, you look at it long enough, and then it becomes a fixture of the culture, and you sort of try it out, and slowly you start to like it. And I think what's really interesting, and I think this is also a problem with violence in our society too. It's going to sound totally unrelated at first, but I think they're closely tied. You're detached from what the thing is, and it becomes so abstracted that it's not the thing.
Right.
And then you think you could take it into the real world, and the process of like talking yourself into it happens all over again. So like gay sex in a role play or as portrayed in fan art is not gay sex proper, right?
Right.
And you're actually totally unfamiliar with it. And then you reintroduce yourself to it when you start exploring it in real life. I mean, I think that's why, we have all of these like lesbian influencers, like the bimbo Chrissy Chapeka, and I use the word bimbo, that's her coinage. Her whole channel and all of her social media is about how she's gay, happy pride, she loves tits, she kisses women, whatever. But if you really look at her content, it's really just about how she sleeps with men. So her expression of being gay is some abstracted gayness. I would bet $1 million she's never seen a pussy in real life, other than her own. Honestly, yeah.
Like that. But what is this abstract notion? So Helena, you were mentioning this. Like, what is it about like the yaoi, like particular form of like, can I even say the word twinkish gay male, like that is divorced from the actual experiential nature of what it means to be gay? Not that I would know what it's like to be gay, but like, but like, what is it in particular that attracts young women of a particular type to this type of content? Like what is, like, I know this is a kind of like we're getting into murky territory, I noticed, but like what is it? It seems that it's not like the gay culture of the 80s or even nowadays. Like, I've known a bit of gay men in my lifetime. One of my mother's best friends, actually. But he was like the old school, like, 1980s gay, like, and it seems like that culture is so radically different than what was going around in Tumblr at the time. And like, I just don't see how young teenage girls can relate to what it's like being a gay man. Like, it doesn't seem, it seems illogical, but then there's no logic to it, I guess.
They don't. And that's the thing. They're not into gay men, and they're not relating to gay men. And even like words like yaoi or like Twinkie, I think don't really capture what's really going on, because I mean, I'm not a huge anime person, but from what I understand, like yaoi are professionally produced content that are stories about gay characters that are canonically gay. Whereas a lot of the gay content that is being consumed in fandom is not characters who are intended by the creators to be gay. Right. So that's one thing. And the second thing is that a lot of these characters that are written into this narrative of being in relationships with each other aren't really, they're not like I said, they're not characters who are intended to be gay. They're not played by gay actors. They're not styled as gay. They're not written as gay. They are, for all intents and purposes, fictional straight men. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the times, you know, somewhere on the spectrum of normal in terms of like masculinity and heterosexual behavior. They, whether it's a character or a man in real life, it'll like their partners are women. They express interest in women. They have, you know, various masculine mannerisms and interests and all this kind of stuff. So
yeah, both Sam and Dean were married, if I recall, on the show, like canonically. Yeah. So.
What?
But I said both Sam and Dean were canonically married on the show at one point. Yeah.
I didn't even get that far. I don't remember anything about Supernatural, but yeah, so it's not like gay men that are really like the objects of these young women. It's something about this. I think for some, it's like it's almost a fascination with a form of relationship that is between two men who are like friends or platonically close. But I think there's kind of either in reality or in tropes in media, there's like a special type of close bond formed between two men. And I think that's something that women don't experience in the same way and are incredibly fascinated by this and incredibly drawn to it for some reason. So I think that's one aspect. And then there's all sorts of psychological things at play. Like one thing that I kind of talk about is how as a woman or as like a young girl, more like you can, you know, you want to fantasize, you want to think about guys that are hot or whatever, but sometimes you can be so insecure about your body or about your status as a woman. You feel so threatened by I guess your status on like the female hierarchy, that you almost, it's painful to visualize yourself in fantasies with a man. So there's something there with that where you can have like these girls who they get drawn to the gay content because it circumvents having to imagine themselves, and it also circumvents imagining a separate woman, because imagining a separate woman with a man that they're attracted to, that triggers all sorts of inferiorities and anxieties, and then imagining yourself also triggers inferiorities and anxieties. So it's something that appeals to a highly neurotic type of young girl, and like a highly like imaginative type of young girl where they like they need this fantasy aspect, but they have all sorts of conflicting psychological anxieties and complexes that make like normative fantasy and like normative relationship pursuit and normative expression of their attraction to men difficult. Yes, and then they come across this content, like Catherine was saying, where at first you're like, what the hell? Like, I remember the first slash ship that I ever heard of was from the book The Outsiders. It was,
oh my God, I love The Outsiders!
Yeah, me too. That was my first encounter with it too.
Yeah, oh my God, that's crazy. That's crazy. But I first read it and I was like, what the f? Like, Ponyboy is not gay.
He's a gay slayer in that book. Like,
you know, as you're talking, Helena, like it's taboo without being threatening. Like I think the mirror image of this is the is, you know, imagining a daddy or like an older man. Like the young girls who are nymphets, or, you know, as it used to be called, I think now they go by dollets or coquettes. They are not actually attracted to older men, and they would be disgusted by a 45 plus year old naked body. But they're
back in the day, they did like older men, though. What happened?
No, I mean, I think like a 14-year-old girl who's like, you know, Tumblr blogging about this. It's the taboo of like you're transgressing something, but it's like both. You know, it's both attainable, but it's also not. Like, you know, it's never actually going to happen.
Right.
And you know, you find that even with that example, the girls who do try to transgress that boundary are very traumatized by it, and they actually don't want it. It's something that's like you can only imagine, and there's all these other women who are having the same fantasy.
But then, you know, unfortunately, a lot of like, just like full disclaimer, a lot of those women end up getting like preyed upon by creepy older men who are like borderline.
I mean, the slash fangirls get preyed upon too. I mean, all of these groups, the pro Anna girls get preyed upon by anorexia fetishists. There's a predator type for every one of these communities.
But I think like what you mean, like, which is something that is, and hear me out, because I want to get back to Helena's point, because I feel that even young men experience that inability to relate to the desired object, right? Like this is very Lacanian, right? Like it is, you know, the object of desire is not the real object, right? Like that, the inability to experience, like there was this one post from back when Reddit was somewhat decent that Atrazine Griper posted actually that I will read to you. But before that, I wanted, like, I know this is totally sus territory, and as a trad, I do not endorse this, but of course some people think trads do, but whatever. When it comes to the Lolita thing of like young women fetishizing older men, as creepy and disgusting as that is for older men to prey upon young women, we all know that morally, ethically, legally, that's terrible. But I do feel that there is a psychology where young women, and this is expressed in media, even in the book Lolita, remember, the guy's life gets destroyed at the end, right? Like that was the big thing. He like lives a life of misery because he was essentially not that he was the victim, but rather he played a game with a very damaged young woman. And I feel like that aspect is not covered because we know how disgusting and evil it is for older men to prey upon young, vulnerable women. But these women particularly do have a particularly damaged type of psyche, and they do sort of play games, and they do have, you know, not to say that they are a perpetrator. I'm not saying that. That's obviously not true. But I'm saying that there is something there where there is sort of like a dance between them, which will always lead to destruction. But I just think that there are particular young women, and you've said this, Helena, that the ones who have fetishized, you know, the baby daddy thing, there's obviously some unresolved issues, but without psychologizing it, I feel that even within the space of literature and art, there is that expression for it. There is that sort of history of it. Lolita is the most, you know, obvious example. There have been other ones as well. Anna Niss's book House of I Word, for instance, like that is another fascinating work of literature that doesn't deal directly with the subject, but rather deals with the sort of emotive sentiments of having a quasi creepy relationship with people around you that may transgress boundaries. So I'm theory selling. I'm very sorry though. Helena, go on, and then Default. Well, yeah, because I want to talk about this sort of relation about the inability to picture one's own being with the desired object. I feel that that's fascinating. So the floor is yours.
I think to your point, Default, I think it's very true that a lot of these girls, and my experiences with like the gay fan fiction stuff, I never, you know, was into like older men or knew any young girls who were into that. But I can imagine that there are similarities in that it's absolutely true that there's this fantasy that completely preoccupies the mind. But then when you go and try to bring that fantasy into the real world, it just doesn't work. Like, for example, like I would be obsessed with like these gay stories and relationships. But then if you showed me gay porn, like I found it completely repulsive and disgusting. So there's almost something about that fantasy where what is desired is more about the symbolism and meaning found within not only the narrative, but the creation of that narrative in a communal way that is more seductive and more desirable to that young girl than, what is actually happening on a material. Well, I guess it can't be material because it's in your head, but on like a
virtual. Yeah,
in a way that, if you were to try to bring these fantasies into real life, then it would be material way, where that's not really like the goal. It's not like I said before, it's not that they're obsessed with gay men. They're obsessed with the creation of these complex, dramatic, emotional, cathartic relationships from men that they are interested in because of how they're portrayed in media and what those characters mean to them, and what the relationships between the characters mean to them. Like it's a lot of playing and almost kind of like intellectual and artistic exercise.
Yeah, all fan fiction has that element to it.
Yeah. So that's just my thought about that. It's very like, at least to me, it was very unliteral. Like I said, gay porn, gross. The actual gay guys that I knew couldn't relate to them. But I was in this fantasy world where that is what mattered to me.
Do you feel though that I think like, having, like I said, having known gay men, the experience of them like coming into their own like recognition of that, the fact that they are gay, I think is very different than how like maybe it's somewhat similar to straight men coming into realization of like, now I perceive women, but it's like the sort of the way in which, like, of course, as a man, I can't understand this, but the way in which women, when they hit puberty and they sort of discover themselves and they discover their attractions, it's very different though, in terms of the socialization of young women and young gay men or young straight men even. Like I feel, but do you feel that perhaps the reason that this type of content, besides the sort of narrative aspect of this is your favorite show, this is shipping, this is slash, whatever, do you feel that it's a way to neutralize something that young women inherently have a very difficult time with, which is young, awakening masculinity and young men? Do you feel that by putting in this sort of ideational space into these particularly ethereal gay men of popular shows or literature or whatever, is that a way to sort of neutralize their own insecurities around these, like, imagine you're back in high school and you all of a sudden these brutes, these beasts, they come alive and they start to look at you like intensely with the male gaze, and they're barbarians, right? Like they're young men, like, like,
they are these intimidating, foreign, scary barbarians, but you're also sometimes obsessively attracted to them.
Right.
And I think that is something that is really difficult on young girls, but especially like the type of young girl that gravitates to fan fiction, which, I mean, maybe it's not all of them, but I think it's definitely like a correlation of already struggling socially and already just being extremely insecure of yourself and overthinking everything. So, and I think that for these girls, and a lot of them, like, they want to have control. They want to have social control. They want to control how others perceive them. They want to control how people interact with them. And when faced with this budding masculinity that you're describing, these young men are not controllable.
Oh God, no! Oh no! Oh man!
I would add though that I would say the girl who is using slash to explore her sexuality is not exploring her sexuality with a flesh and blood young man.
Exactly.
There is nothing to be threatened by because they're not interested in her. She's interested in them.
Exactly. It's a way to like take all that energy that you have of like being attracted to boys, and just like completely like beat around the bush of actually having to reckon with like boys as they really are.
I know we're terrible.
No, not even just because you're terrible. I'm not even saying like, oh, they're so scared because they're getting sexually harassed in the hallways. Like,
it's more of like, it's more of like the sort of the way that men, like the way that we relate to each other is very different than the way I think women relate to each other, especially when you're growing up.
Men are extremely foreign, and that's one thing that I personally struggled with. So pre-puberty, I had a lot of male friends, and I just found them fun to get along with. But then once puberty started hitting, like my orientation to them and their orientation to me completely changed. And like, as someone who kind of really struggled socially, like I could not wrap my head around this. I could not like wrap my head around like how other girls were interacting with the boys in this new and different and scary way. So I just like completely checked out. I was just like, okay, bye. I don't want anything to do with this. I'm just going to like recede into this world of fiction and fantasy. And in that world, you can like be really interested in these boys, but you're completely in control of them. You literally invent their existence. Like you are what makes them do what they do. And I think that is something that's really valuable to these girls, where they have an outlet to express their attraction, and their fascination, not only just attraction, but just fascination and curiosity, but that they have complete control over it.
Right, because
and it doesn't trigger the anxieties and inferiorities.
Yeah, because men, by definition, at that age especially, are uncontrollable. Like that's not in this, like not in like we were saying, like, although that unfortunately does happen, like the foregoing of basic decency and you know, predatory sexual advances. But I do feel, but in terms of like the meta of like young men, like, you know, for example, in my experience when I was in school in high school, you know, I wasn't like a total book nerd. I mean, I was, but like I had respect from people because, you know, my family and where I grew up, and like I was but I was a nomad though. I never had like a specific group because I could go into different social arrangements. But unfortunately, you know, I know friends who, you know, they were in the clique, right? And like I don't have that. I was sort of like alone. But, you know, I wasn't bullied or anything. In fact, you know, I beat up a few older kids in my day when I was in school. But you know, one kid, I beat him up. He respected me after that. He was 2 grades older than me. I was in elementary school. You know, but I think, yeah, it definitely is, I think, a way in which it assuages that anxiety by controlling the sort of subjectivity of the being of men. But I think that, you know, the very, let's call it very, you know, hot wire political implication of that is that now when you have an ideology that dictates that now you are in charge of the sort of subjective perception the grand other has of you, because that is enforced by a large chain of discourses and power knowledge and social orthodoxies. I think like that's probably why this, you know, new ideology is attractive to these young women in particular, because in some ways it does give them an agency to demand that the other recognize them. Mm-hmm. And before Default gets in, I will say that there is an incredible loss of culture geared towards the sort of socially awkward, not conventionally attractive young women. Because I would say during the 1990s, there was, you know, I made this joke on Twitter that to prepare for this this pod that I was rewatching Tank Girl, but there was in the 1990s, in the 80s and 90s, there was an explosion of like riot girl and alternative literature and comics made by women, and there was sort of like unconventionally attractive women, or rather women who didn't fit the norm, who were anxious about the, you know, pretty girl, you know, the social anxiety of being a, you know, a young woman who doesn't experience the male gaze. There was like a ton of that. There was Riot Girl, you know, there was a bunch like that. But, you know, nowadays it seems like the LGBT culture has put in place that, same. But Catherine, you get in, but I want to see the discussion between you two more. So let's see where this goes.
I'm going to go grab my laptop charger. I left it on the other side of the room.
No problem.
I mean, yeah, I think the other thing here too is that when you look at something too long, the yearning you feel is very confusing. I remember feeling like I wanted to be a boy and talking to other girls about this, and it was a pretty common experience. And there was nothing in my environment that told me that that's a normal feeling and that you can explore that feeling. So it was just I never had the opportunity. But you grow out of that. I don't think I was comfortable in my own skin until I was like, I don't know. I remember looking at a photo of myself at 19 and just being horrified. And not in the normal, not in the usual I feel ugly way, but in sort of like I could not believe I was inhabiting a body because I was
Mm.
so used to. I mean, I don't know. I role played. 24/7 until I was like, I think I stopped like halfway through my first year of marriage. Like it was a long time.
What do you
Right.
mean by role play? Do you mean like
Like I did like
next level
text.
LARP over here?
It's not a LARP. It's just the RP. I mean, I did like literate role play, which is basically like it's like writing a story.
Okay.
It's sort of like it's like collaborative fan fiction almost. And I was always a male character, always.
Yeah, Live Journal, that was popular if I recall.
Yeah, I did it on LiveJournal, on Zanga, on forums.
Oh,
on
Xanga!
Neopet.
Oh my god!
Yeah, on Tumblr,
Yeah.
on Twitter, and Facebook.
When did you discover like the music of the femcel, like Veruca Salt, Hole,
Oh, man.
Kathleen Hanna, the Dresden Dolls, like, yeah.
God, maybe 2004.
Yeah, yeah. See, I was the metalhead at that time, so I was like still listening to Korn and but yeah, go ahead. Yes.
No, but I mean, like you get attached to these characters and you pick portrayed bys, right? Which is like the avatar that usually a picture of a celebrity is supposed to represent them, and you like look at them and you're using them as like a vessel to express whatever desire, and you just want that body so badly because you start associating it with happiness and real experience. Like, I mean, to say I was invisible, right, was like, I mean, that is generous. I mean, it was just a really terrible time, and I don't think I felt seen in any meaningful way until I was like 27. Like it took me like late bloomer barely cuts it, right? So I really think that I would have I would have had a very different life if I was maybe 10 years younger.
If you were a Zoomer, yeah. Wait, Helena, you're only like 24 now, 23.
Yeah, I turned 24 next month.
Okay, yeah. Man, I turned 30 in December. I can't believe this. It's terrible. Yeah. So, did you start off like sort of strongly identifying with a particular role play or a particular like collection of media or mood boarding on Tumblr? Like, what was your sort of I don't want to say awakening because we all know the story, but like the sort of like the slow seduction that comes with the sort of hyperreal nature of media nowadays, right?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh. So my first introduction to fan fiction was The Outsiders, but I was only reading like straight fan fiction of that. And then I think my slash awakening was yeah, the summer after my freshman year of high school, I was about to switch schools. And so I was just spending the whole summer, like I had zero friends. And so I was like, I'm going to reread the Harry Potter series. And then so during those 3 months of summer, I just reread the whole Harry Potter series. And I was like, oh my God, like this is, because I hadn't read it since I was like a little kid. And so I just like fell back in love with it. And I went on Tumblr. I already had a Tumblr account at that point, but I was only really posting about classic rock. And there was no like shipping involved in like my interest in that. It was just
you're a classic rock kid. I forgot.
Yeah.
When I was a kid. No, go ahead. You finish because I keep interrupting. You finish. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm almost done. But yeah, so there was no shipping involved in that. But I went on my Tumblr account. I looked up like Harry Potter stuff, and I really loved like Draco Malfoy. I just
the heel.
Yeah. I projected so much because he's like one of those characters where he's not really that fleshed out. He just serves like a small kind of plot purpose, and then like it's over. But for some reason, I just latched onto him, and I just completely projected like my entire life onto Draco Malfoy.
Oh my God!
And that's when I started looking at more like Draco stuff. That's where I found like Draco Harry, and I was like, oh, and that was my introduction.
I mean, I think we all sort of project our lives into our favorite, You know, I mean, even me, like, you know, growing up as a huge wrestling fan, I feel like that was another, like, you know, your favorite wrestler becomes the thing, right? But you know, it's funny, the classic rock thing, you know, it just, unfortunately, I think, you know, now that rock is dead in a lot of ways, and I think the classic rock thing geared people away from genuine exploration of newer material. I remember one time, me and my old man were in a Wendy's. This was like back in 2007. And there was this kid around my age that walked in with the Led Zeppelin hoodie with, like, you know, the symbols from Led Zeppelin 1, Led Zeppelin 2. And my old man, I was so embarrassed. I was so embarrassed. He goes up to this kid, right? He's like, you know, how old are you, son? He's like, when I was your age, that album came out. What the hell are you doing? Like, Papa, no. Like, it's like just the way, like, typical boomer, like, when I was your age, that album came out in the 70s. Like, and it's true, he was like 14 when Led Zeppelin 1 came out. So the classic rock thing, yeah, that was a particular trend. But I bring this up because do you feel, oh God, do you feel like that was like, were you a tomboy, or you know, you said you weren't a tomboy though. You like had some tomboy traits, but you weren't like classic, you know, tomboy neurodivergent girl.
Yeah, no, I wasn't a tomboy. I don't think I'm neurodivergent either. I think I don't know. I have like just a weird personality where I gravitated towards just a lot of maybe interests that intersect with like the neurodivergent tomboy, but like inside is this like feminine, like straight normie.
Yeah. Because I think, you know, I brought up the sort of the alternative culture in different eras that are now being like worshipped and commodified by Tumblr culture, by, you know, late millennials and Zoomers on Tumblr, like, you know, discovering Kathleen Hanna or whatever. But I think like even in antiquity, like up until very recently, there was like they were pretty, you know, none of them were flattering, but there were spaces for unconventional women that were sort of skittish about their own relation to the female hierarchy and their own relation to sexuality. The nunnery, the schoolmare, the sort of librarian archetype, like all of these then later become fetishized by third wave feminists and then Tumblr culture. But still, these were genuine places where the female hierarchy sort of collapses into more of an organic, I would almost say quasi-communitarian element, especially when it comes to nunneries that are led by and for women. You know, this is why Paglia says that, for example, you know, all the second wavers, they all had the quote unquote nun phase, right? Like the lesbian.
Well, I don't think it does anyone any favors either for this thing of like identifying as hot, even if you're objectively ugly. I mean, the reason, and you know, and it's always skews people out when I say this, and I feel like I've been saying it a lot on appearances lately. But I mean, like the reason that like I don't accept compliments and I say like, no, like I identify as ugly and that's what I'm gonna be, like that's who I am, is because I don't think everyone should identify as beautiful or be like, I'm a hot girl. And like it's not about litigating that, it's about like normalizing having that identity and not making a freak show out of yourself. Like that can be the reality. It's fine.
But do you feel default though? Oh, sorry, go ahead. I cut you off. But like,
no, I was gonna say, like, I think like now, you know, the only people who seem to do that now is sort of in like this crust punk way where they don't really buy it and they're kind of like treating their bodies like trash, and like there's a real sense of like, you know, they like strip themselves of dignity as a statement, and I don't think that's necessary.
Yeah, but see, but again, like that is an older archetype with like female youth culture, I feel like. But nowadays it seems that there's a conscious like instrumentalizing and commodification of those things. Like you, in your article, I read, you sent me, but I remember reading it. You said this tweet that like, this is brilliant right here. This is brilliant. There's a weird overlap with millennial feminism and quote, I'm a hot mess. I'm trash. I'm a train wreck. Rhetoric, having sex you don't like having, and hating yourself for it, Taco Bell for every meal, trivializing alcoholism, getting another shit tattoo. It's funny because at the time of recording, this Monday, I'm actually releasing another installment of Monday Modern Art Madness, but the Patreon exclusive is going to be about Tracy Eamon's pop tent. Like, you know, the Tracy Eamon tent where she okay, so for those who don't know, Tracy Eamon is the archetype of this, I'm a hot mess, I'm unconventionally attractive, I'm like, you know, the predecessor of Frida Kahlo. And she did this thing where she took a children's pop tent and she embroidered the names of everyone she was quote unquote intimate with. So the piece is called Everyone I've Ever Been Intimate With from 1967 to 2005. And so that's like the installation. Yeah. So Tracy Eamon is like, to me, ground zero in the art world, at least, for that type of archetype that you're talking about, Catherine. But it's like, it's kind of like, you know, the hot mess is, I think, such... Do Zoomers have the hot mess? Because that was such a... When I was growing up, that was a powerful millennial archetype. Every high school, every elementary school even had the hot mess. Like that.
Zoomers have mentally ill.
Yeah.
I mean, I think like it's like a form of nihilism that's like very common among millennials and Zoomers, and of course, like you see it in Gen X, like Kathy Acker, right? Like who else? You know, but the point, I don't think people realize, like the point is Kathy Acker was a train wreck that you felt bad for and died tragically, and you know Courtney Love is tragic.
Francesca Woodman
is all of these women are tragic. You know, if they didn't themselves, something else got them, and if they're still alive, they're miserable. I don't like. There's nothing, and now it's been sort of like normified to be this way.
Tracy Eamon's the perfect another, like nowadays, if you look at her newer work in White Cube, I mean, it is like it's meaningful, but it's like, oh my god,
Eliza Schartz. That's just where that's. You know, I'm thinking of the abortion girl, the Yale abortion.
Oh yes. Yeah.
Another one.
I covered that in my Abortion is Normal essay. Yeah. That's another one. Do you think Mattress Girl, Sulkowitz, like you had this amazing episode about Mattress Girl, but like
no, I don't think she's not quite the archetype. I mean, I think I think she marks the beginning of the reaction to that, right?
Oh,
but it still exists. I mean, I think any like even like normie TikTokers getting on there and saying like, I had a terrible first date where I felt totally disrespected. I got too drunk. I him anyway. And then, you know, and then he told me I was fat and ghosted me, you know, and then like they're sort of laughing at themselves. They're not laughing at themselves. They feel bad and they should feel bad. And that's an example of it.
Yeah. And, but then the reaction I think is then when it comes specifically to the issue we're talking about, like Helena, do you feel that was your transitioning away to, was it an escape of your own insecurities around attractiveness and so forth, or do you think that there was something else behind it? I don't know if you've answered this question in other interviews, but I feel like it's pertinent because again, I want to talk about other things besides your own personal story, but like, do you feel that like you can empathize with a lot of these young women who try to find an out of their own anxieties around both like this sort of weird, I would say, again, I'm not a woman. I don't know, of course. I have a different thing going on as a man who is not conventionally attractive. But there is this weird dialectic where you want the male gaze, but you don't. Like, you want the attention of men, right? Because that's affirming for women, especially nowadays. I mean, with social media and all that. But you don't want it because the externalities of having a lot of attention by young men and by older men and by all men and by creepy men and by terrible men and by fat dudes like me in Hawaiian shirts, like you know, like the reality of being a hot woman, in some ways it's like, man, it's kind of like going into going into the Blade vampire rave and being the only human and everyone's looking at you with the vampire eyes, right? Like the Blade 1, the club scene, right? But no, it's like, was that your sort of, was that what pushed you towards your own experience? And do you think that's what pushes young women towards affirming a more of, affirming a fluidity when it comes to sexuality and gender? Yeah.
I think it's an aspect for sure, but I think that like preoccupation with appearance is like part of a just a larger psychological tendency to not like yourself and not feel comfortable in social situations because you don't like yourself, and you feel a ton of shame about like literally everything. And so there is that aspect of escape, but there's also the aspect of like building an alternate self and an alternate reality that you like convince yourself you can just step into. By taking these like medical procedures, and by dressing yourself in a certain way, and by calling yourself a certain way, you can literally like shed your past and everything you don't like about yourself. And literally this, you can shed your identity, which you have damned as being like completely worthless, and step into this like new, better persona.
Yeah. I feel like, but men also have this, but I think online LARPing is probably an avenue of that. Like, you know, I'm not actually some, you know, fat loser in real life that still lives with his parents. I'm actually a based fashy Giga Chad that posts about the, you know, the birth rates and what we should do about that on Telegram or whatever, on Twitter, before I in my 50th burner account on Twitter. I feel, but I think like let me say something though before we proceed. Is that I do, like, you know, I'm going to get in trouble for this, but I do feel that I'm going to get in trouble with my people, not with, you know, interlockers. Like, I do feel that in some ways, beauty and identity and questions around one's own self and perception to others, there is a level of social construction there. Rather, there is a level of, not that beauty in itself, like, because I think that beauty is eternal in an extent. But when it comes to attractiveness qua beauty, there is where there's an ambiguity between attractiveness and beauty. Like, for example, and please, Helena, don't take this the wrong way. I'm not simping, so I'm just, don't worry about it. This is purely objective as possible. I feel like when I look at your particular visage, your face, you have a very ancient structure and a very sort of, I would say, there's an element of, I would say, almost like a Botticelli painting there. You have very strong facial features, but I'm being this objectively, not like, you know, I'm being a simp. But of course, Gio is always being a simp metaphysically. And so, but you have a very particular bone structure, very particular, very striking facial features. But I think the difference being is that you have a level of beauty that is recognized by this more older form of, I mean, let's say you have very Grecoid type of, you know, Hellenic features, right? So, yeah. So I think, but that requires a maturity, something that I feel that the work of art could depict, right? That requires an engagement with the particular face of a woman that isn't what I would say among our millennial and Zoomer milieu, and among the sort of the instantiation of particular notions of beauty with our generation.
Well, not online. In real life, it's probably much different.
Oh yeah. Probably. I was gonna say, like, the internet is like a completely unnatural way of experiencing these things, because obviously, like, there's absolutely a natural component in like being a woman or a young girl and like pursuing beauty and wanting like to be attractive, both to men, but also, you know, in comparison with other women. Like, it has its own social significance among women.
Female sexual competition.
Right.
Yeah.
And like, that's completely normal. But like, with the internet, and probably with like mainstream media in general, it's not just women competing with the individual other women in their locality and in their communities, and the way that their physical bodies actually look, or their physical faces actually look. It's you're literally competing with like things that don't even exist.
Instagram,
like, you're competing,
baddies,
and not even just Instagram baddies.
Also, like the hypothetical woman.
Yeah, hypothetically.
You're competing with anime girls. That's another.
No,
you're never gonna win that battle right there.
You know Medgold? And I've seen other women say this, right? I'm sorry to bring it up. Medgold, I know you think I'm an ugly fed, whatever.
Yeah, go ahead.
Moving right along. But the reason I actually think he has some very interesting writing. But the reason that women get angry at him is because he constructs a hypothetical woman that the female reader is implicitly comparing herself to and knows she can never live up to. And
that's pretty based, actually.
becomes furiously angry, right?
Yeah.
But this is happening. I use Med Gold because that's an example that your audience would understand. But this is happening all over the internet all the time, and that's what Helena is describing.
Right.
Man, I hope saying something nice about this guy isn't going to make me a mark somehow. But you know,
a lot of like even far right people like despise him though. Like the Amarnites hate him. Yeah.
Oh well, I mean, I saw that they had a little throwdown. I mean, it doesn't matter. This has nothing to do. I don't need this person's approval. It's none of my business.
I know what you mean though. But, yeah.
But I mean, I do think that's sort of like a really good example that your listeners would probably know about. So imagine that, but then it happens in every sort of genre of post. And it's like there's like an imaginary woman that the person probably isn't even intentionally describing, right? But it completely destroys your self-conception.
But what is the woman that Med Gold describes, though? You'd figure.
It's the beautiful woman with like perfect tits and a perfect face, and she's not so weird to be online. She wouldn't be reading this post, you know. It's the invisible female relative or the invisible girlfriend that's always sort of implied when he's talking about the good girl to his sort of like, oh, these like neurotic cows that I'm fighting with on Twitter.
Yeah, the femcels I'm fighting with. Yeah,
right. Like, and you as a reader, you think, you know, the reason people get angry with him in the same way people got angry with radfem because there's a part of you that secretly agrees and you're like, he has my number and I wish I was this woman.
Yeah, like when radfem talked about like men, like the sort of like ethereal lathe twink young man being like the archetype of beauty, I was fucking seething. I'm like, radfem, please. Like I'm the total opposite. I'm the Chud Morlock. Like, you know.
I used
the beautiful
to think
boy I'm not. Like, yeah.
But like it's weird because like as I've gotten older, I've become kind of like repulsed by that.
By what? By the twink?
By the twink.
Like, the beautiful boy?
Yeah, because it's like because I see the twink as like that was me as a teenager. That's not like someone I want to have sex. You know what I mean?
It's like not a real burly man like me with hair on my chest. You know?
Not that's not quite my taste either. But you know.
Oh! That's it. Med Gold is 100% right. I am Med Gold's strongest soldier now. So. You Default, I can't believe you did this to me. No, my simping. I should have listened to Keith Wood. Simping never pays off.
No, but seriously, I think we.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I think occasionally, like women who are like not aren't living up to the like imaginary woman. Like there's always a shadow of like the good girls. Like there's every sort of influencer will have that. It's like you look at her and you see her imperfections as a woman. And that's where intersexual competition comes in.
Right.
But it's like the shadow of like, oh, she's perfect. Oh, she looks the way you're supposed to look. She acts the way you're supposed to act. It's a really overwhelming thing.
But do we even have that influence in contemporary culture? Because it seems the opposite is being affirmed by contemporary culture, where it's like you can't be the good girl because being the good girl is being subject to the male gaze, and that is evil. That is like robbing yourself of your own. Because I know like people have accused you both of some quite vicious things for different reasons. Not to bring up drama, but like I am
You'll
doing.
paywall this part, right?
I have to
paywall me saying something nice about Med Gold.
Yeah, no, I won't paywall that. I have to keep in mind my patrons want some nice hot goss, but but both of you I think have been lambasted in some respects by some, you know, I would say more or less bad faith people, and you shouldn't really concern yourself with criticism. That like, oh, you two are playing to a particular right-wing male gaze, and like you're playing into it, and like you become like you're harvesting an army of simps, and like, you know, you're using radical politics to do this. It's like there's that. I think if you're a woman online that engages somewhat with not just like right-wing politics, but I mean like the sort of unconventional, unorthodox thinking, I feel like a lot of women are subject to this. I've always maintained this, and I've always gotten heat for saying this, that the role of the woman in a lot of these spaces is you do get a raw deal. And like some women, like, you know, without naming names, the first generation of e-influencers on the political right, like they took advantage of that. But I feel like, first of all, it would be wrong to code both of you in a political category, right? Because like I don't see like I mean I don't know, maybe some kind of like weirdo on Telegram will make an edit of Helena with the spinny wheel in the background and no please no I'm gonna cut that. I'm gonna cut that one out before I get
I'm sorry to speak to you, but I'd imagine we have audience overlap where it's like parents and women, right? There are men, but it's mostly like my audience is not men. It's not right-wing men. It's like politically ambiguous women and old people.
Yeah.
Like straight up.
Yeah, I relate.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. Like, so the accusation that you two are playing to the particular desire of online right-wing men is kind of bullshit. What do you feel about the audience that you've cultivated, though? Do you feel it's pretty even? I mean, I know inevitably skews to the right in some respects, but do you feel but I don't particularly view you as a right-wing person, though. I mean, you don't have like an elaborate, like you're not reading Julius Evola in your spare time, like maybe oh no, we shouldn't say anything because that'll you're one of the most canceled women in the world, so don't worry about it. It's all it's cool.
I am the most canceled woman in America.
Yeah more than Lorena Boebert, more than the majority woman.
Yeah
but no, your audience is not particularly like right wing. I don't think, like, you have a very broad, like, I mean, you do have a lot of gender critical people, obviously, but it's not like there's people posting like imp jacks and giga chads in your mentions all the time. I mean, that's that is true. My audience is very diverse. It's there are some right-wing people, but honestly, I feel like I follow more right-wing people than follow me. Like I definitely sympathize with kind of like dissident right politics and a lot of the stuff that said. I follow a lot of people on like that side of Twitter, but I just don't really like partake that much in like the discourse that happens on that side of Twitter, because I see my account as having like just a different purpose, a social importance rather than
I know if I get into like certain issues, like one of the only things that I've kind of like broken this habit on is talking about the I don't know if I can say that, but
I'll edit it. Yeah, the sacrament. Okay. I like to call it.
Okay, yeah, the holy sacrament. Yeah. So I did break that to like rant about. So but most of the time, like I just kind of like keep a lot of my other views to just like other spaces than on Twitter. Actually, because of that, I think I just don't have like that solely right-wing following. I do have a lot of gender critical people, but also a lot of them don't like me. So that's
well, you have a lot of radfems that are in your mentions, a lot of like old school feminists, like these are
which is interesting to me because I just constantly, well, less so now than I used to, maybe like 2 years ago, but I have very publicly like broken with those people. But if they want to follow me, if they want to continue following me, that's cool. But I literally, there was like maybe 6 months where just every post that I made was just, I hate you, radfems, go away. So
go away, Snell, pulling the salt.
Yeah.
But what sparked that, actually? Was it that you became more right-wing, or is that you have a fundamental disagreement with the radfem constitution or make?
It's a combination between like my personal views changing and me disagreeing with radical feminism, and it's my frustration with how much like the gender critical or radical feminist take on trans just completely dominates everything. And coming from my position, it was extremely difficult for me to like actually have my own analysis of the situation and form my own beliefs and express my own observations and reflections, because these radfems would just like come at me, just policing everything that I was saying. And like, it's like they have their preconceived idea of it, and it doesn't matter that my experience is different. If what I'm saying deviates from their preconceived analysis of gender stuff, then that means I hate women and I'm a handmaiden and like all this kind of stuff. So and also the other thing that really soured me on them was the way that they treat like detrans men was like just a huge frustration, because these are like just guys who have been through a lot, and a lot of the times like they're suffering like genuine medical consequences. They were groomed into
yes.
it as children or as teenagers, like the same way that I was. But it's like they're just kind of labeled like perverts and fetishists, and like, oh well, they're just men and men are this, and all this kind of stuff. So
yeah, I'll have to bleep that out as well. The art, well, yeah, but don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. I like people talking. I like to give you a good open breath, but because I'll take the time to edit it out, because I feel that the conversation, like for instance, like you agreed to this interview, and like I said, like I'm on the political right, obviously.
Yeah.
But I mean, is it because you feel more comfortable with me because I'm not like that like unoptical, or is it that like just we're friends and then it's like, hey, want to come on, my content? I went on my own. I divested myself of follow the rules, and now I'm on my own. So yeah, I know.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that we're mutuals, and you post interesting stuff, and I don't feel like you're insane. So
yeah. But I mean, well, maybe I am, but no, I feel like because I feel like the times that we interacted on the previous podcast, I feel like there the previous podcast. I feel like it was a mess, the first one, and like we didn't give you enough sufficient time, and there was some creepy stuff going on. I'm not gonna lie. There was that one young woman that never mind. That's ancient.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. But because I feel like this is why I wanted to do this, because you two are very unique and interesting, and we still didn't get to the amount of attraction. But to round this off, this particular topic, would you say you're more socially conservative now? Like, do you believe in marriage and family and all that stuff?
Yeah.
But you're not. Yeah, but you're not like posting. Like I said, you're not posting spinny wheels. You're not like a total.
Yeah. I'm not. I would say I'm not like part of like the movement, like if you can call it a movement, like, you know what I'm saying? Like where people, they come together, they're in all the group chats, they're posting all the same memes. Like I'm not right wing in that like social sense. I just like privately hold a lot of these beliefs, and I will express them honestly in like an honest conversation, but I'm not going out there, like
propaganda posting. As a woman,
unless it's something that I really like care about, and like and
you feel that certain positions that radfems hold, that grates with your more like pro family, pro marriage, socially, not, I wouldn't even say socially conservative, but like more of your like your values, like, because that's kind of weird to me. I didn't know about this deep lore that you had in a falling out with the radfems. I think is it just their approach to men, or is it their approach to the way they treat, like you said, the way they treat detransitioners? But how does your theory of detransition like contradict their narrative, like specifically? And then I want to get default in this as well. But yeah,
right. I mean, I see like the trans thing, and it's like very, very multifaceted. Like there's individual psychological things going on. There's group psychological things going on.
I would agree with this as well, by the way. Yeah, even though I'm LeBase trad reactionary, but yeah, go ahead. It's a very go ahead.
Yeah, there's certainly like cultural and political and all sorts of like financial incentives, all that's going on. And I see that like it's on a large scale, and it's permeating all sorts of aspects of society, and it goes so much further than just trans. Like I feel like where I kind of break with the radfems, it's like, oh well, if we could just go back to how we looked at the world in 1993 socially and politically and sociologically, then that's what we want to do. But I don't think that's correct. I think that like, everything that has led up to this point, you can actually go and look at that. You can observe how things have changed and developed over time, and you can make conclusions based on that. And I just really disagree with it's either like, trans is a backlash to feminism. It's like patriarchy too, coming back and like fighting the feminists, which I don't think that's an accurate assessment at all. Like I said, it's just so much more multifaceted. And I've just felt so many times in the past that when I do try to explore these different facets, especially when it's kind of like a third rail. Like I know a big third rail is like, well, how does the social justice ideology influence people to become trans?
Right.
It's not just gender ideology. It's all this stuff about race, and it's all this stuff about, consent and sexual harassment and women and
the sexualization of the young woman as well is an important part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's definitely like a big third rail. Just like media and like I don't know, some on the right like would call it like the regime, like the ideology of America, or like the ideology of, I guess, like
the empire. But no, I think what's interesting though is that, to me, I mean, I'm sympathetic to a lot of, not a lot, but like a fair bit of radfem ideas. And I'm sympathetic, at least in part, to that narrative that a select group of men are utilizing certain gender ideologies to prey upon women. But that's like a totalizing theory. But one thing I wanted to run by you is that, again, I have a lot of sympathies with radfems, but do you feel that in their analysis of the trans issues, what's really absent is the trans woman, the trans young woman transitioning to the female to male? And I noticed that that's almost like a gap in their analysis. Am I correct in that, or do you feel that as someone who was trans, identified as a man, do you feel like they don't have a same theory of the trans woman that they do with the typical male to female, which I mean they hyper focus on?
I mean, they kind of come at it with an attitude of like, we've got to figure it out. They just have internalized misogyny, and they just can't accept themselves for being lesbians. And it's just no more questions need to be asked. Like, why would you examine this any deeper when it's obviously just that?
But you're not sexually attracted to women, are you? I mean, I guess all women are, I guess.
Well, I mean, yeah, women are a little weird that way.
Yeah.
But but in general, no. I mean, like, I've been in a relationship with a man for a long time, and I have no interest in pursuing women in any way. I want to have babies.
There's there's radical feminist books all about female to male transition and even detransition. Yeah. There's one that I think it's just called detransition.
Yeah. And I think a lot of those are written by like detransitioners themselves.
Yeah, that is true.
Detransitioners who do like have a radfem worldview. But also, Gio, to what you were saying, like, for the record, obviously, like, you don't need to be a radfem to recognize that weirdo men are taking advantage of gender ideology to prey on women. Like, that's something that you can just observe. And obviously the radfems are observing that, but once you dig deeper into like the radfem just like community and sphere and ideology, like, it's almost as unhinged from reality as the trans people are.
Whoa.
They just don't have that like institutional infrastructure to enforce their ideas, but like it's literally so similar. The way that like they socially kind of like enforce their ideology among themselves, and like the purity policing, and just like the lashing out at anybody who disagrees, extreme black and white thinking, and just like inability to engage with any kind of dissenting opinion or like evidence that contradicts their theory. And like, to me, it's no better. Okay, so obviously like the trans people are unhinged from reality by, you know, all this stuff about like gender identity and transitioning and all that. But then the radfems, like, they literally believe that there is like no human nature in men and women. Like, it's all layers of socialization and patriarchy and domination. Exactly. Like, there's no generous way to look at men and women. There's no generous way to look at relationships between men and women. It's all this like nihilistic, kind of meaningless, antenatal, literally anti-human at some points.
Oh yes.
And to me, it's like, if you really go deep into what some of them believe, it's extremely unhinged and it's not healthy. And
I was talking about this recently with Nina Power, her new book, What Men Want. One of the best podcasts I've ever recorded. Nina's a good friend of mine, and she is such a smart, brilliant, beautiful woman. And she, I think, hit the nail on the head because she was involved in these radfem spaces for many years, decades. And she has a particular insight into it. I think maybe I could get Nina on with you two. That would be great. But Default, please defend the radfems for a little bit for me. You're gonna go ahead.
Why would I
talking mad smack about your friends, but you know.
What? I'm not anywhere near. They think oh my God, they think the worst of me.
They do?
My God, yes.
Oh man.
Oh
I can
yes.
imagine.
Oh my God, I do a sex advice column with delicious tacos.
True. Oh yeah, that is true. That is true. That's very
They're like, they think that I'm laying substrate at the altar of dick. I mean,
You're worshiping the phallus. Yeah, the phallus.
Yeah. Oh God. Look. I don't have a problem with them. But I agree with Helena that I think all ideological movements online just devolve into we think it's a problem with wokeness, but it's a structural problem with ideological movements.
To be fair, like
digitally.
right-wing people have delusions around sex and gender as well.
Sure they. Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
I've only heard through the grapevine though.
It is funny how you have a sympathetic take to medical. That's gonna bury. I'm taking the golden shovel out for the radfems. Your relationship to the radfems.
No, I mean, I don't have a. Here's the thing.
The online world is a wrestling match between factions, similar to New Japan Pro Wrestling.
Sure.
Everyone's in a faction. That's what it is. It's an ongoing wrestling federation.
And I'm not necessarily sympathetic to him. I think he makes some good points, but I mean, everyone makes some good points. I obviously don't. Yeah. I obviously don't pay him too much mind, because he enjoys saying negative things about me, as to most of your friends, Gio. But that doesn't mean that they don't.
I try to tell him. I try to, but you got to realize my situation as well. I have to.
No, it's cool. You don't have an obligation to, and I would hope that you don't. In all seriousness, I would hope that you wouldn't put your ass on the line that way. But I mean, my only point is that doesn't mean they don't have some good things to say.
You're a friend.
Well, thank you. A lot of them, even some of my most pernicious haters, have some really brilliant things to say and some really interesting things to add to the conversation. So of course I'll open up an incognito tab.
But with the radfems, they do have their own we all have, like you were saying, we all have this sort of delusion around the experiential nature of the other. I think that is what is going on here.
And it's just too black and white. Yeah. They have some, I think they make some really good points, but I mean, I gotta be real. I'm a bioessentialist, and I do think I think
sexual dimorphism is.
There's a lot of things. I believe in gender. Is another one. I believe in gender roles, and that they definitely do not.
But then how does their particular form of anti-essentialism and postmodernism buff up against, I guess this is a question for both of you. How does that buff up against the trans form of anti-essentialism and gender nonconforming, and I wouldn't say proper, but I would say a bastardization or a hyper reification of postmodern thought? Because I will defend postmodern thought, but in a different way. But it seems like there's a war between the two of them. It seems very interesting. Yeah.
Well, I kind of have begun looking at it. Well, so radical feminism, the academic feminism, second wave feminism, yes. Obviously was kind of held the established view of how we're going to look, how the progressive side of society is going to look at gender and men and women. And then the trans movement academically really emerged from the very same places. So
literature like The Second Sex, Gender Troubles, Pacolithia, I would even say to an extent some ideas from Simone Weil and I'm sorry, I'm theory selling. I'm sorry, I cut you off, Helena. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's all good. But So I think that this idea that is kind of like the basis of, I guess, like second wave type feminist thought, that it's like all of this gender is socially constructed. It means nothing. Gender roles are all just invented to be patriarchy. We need to completely flatten them. We need to see men and women as completely the same, all but socialization placed on top of them. That is so far from reality that it's completely unsustainable. But
Right.
we can't under that idea, under these ideas of seeing men and women, you can't begin to reincorporate ideas that actually give value to gender roles and give meaning to man and woman. All you can do is kind of evolve beyond that into like a convoluted way of injecting meaning into gender and men and women. And that's what I think trans is doing. I don't think it's patriarchal backlash. I think it's a next generation of thinkers, like their brains are literally trying to reconcile with the reality that gender actually means something, and that men are something and women are something,
Right,
and we
right.
have roles in society, but you know, they can't have the ideas that are verboten, so they have to invent new and very convoluted ones. So I
Right.
think that's what's going on. And the radfems, they want to just like take that all and just drag it back to how it used to be and put themselves back onto the top of the hierarchy. They want women to be that like top victim class again.
Right,
But
right.
that's obviously it's slipped away from them.
They
It's
didn't
too late.
realize that their worldview goes both ways. You can't just abolish men, right? Men will also. That's part of why I think uh, their critique of the female to male transition. While I think it's there, and there have been books written about it. It is there. You're right, Gia, to point out that it's weaker somehow. Like it
Yeah.
Yeah.
doesn't. It lacks sort of the ire. It's because like they didn't have enough foresight to realize like, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, literally.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they also don't, like, their kind of narrative is like, oh, it's all of these trans identified males leading this movement. And it's like all the power is in the hands of these trans identified males. But when you actually look at the trans movement objectively, most trans people are women, trans identified people, and most of the people who sympathize with the movement, like literally
Are women.
statistically,
Let's
are women.
Yeah.
The women enforcing it bureaucratically,
Are
they're
women.
women.
Yeah.
So it's really like
Awfuls, you know? Yeah, yeah.
it's all like it's majority women who are like promulgating this, and it's just to sit here and act and just kind of ignore that. And I think that's part of the reason why the analysis of the female to male and the non-binary stuff is so weak, is because if you actually turn to look at it, you're going to see a whole different picture than just a bunch of trans-identified autogynephiles
Yeah.
and Martine Rothblatt leading the charge.
Oh, that is so spicy. I do notice that it seems when it comes to the sort of siege mentality among a lot of these groups, there is sort of a level of like excusing negative behavior in the intragroup relation. But then, but what's one thing I think that we were talking about that I think we should go back to was the element of the difference between the way that men socialize and the way that women socialize, and the way that men. I mean, I know, Bronze Age Pervert talks about this all the time. And no problem, Helena. About this sort of like, how men nowadays having a strong feelings towards each other is coded as like, being gay or whatever, and that there is no space for men to experience like phility and like sort of a deeper connect, because it seems that men can have a deeper connection with each other in certain spaces, like and I think that but then I don't know, maybe do young women have the same thing, or is it different? Like, do among your besties, is it like is it the same, or do you feel that men have more of a capacity to sort of confront each other and to feel a connection to each other on a more, like, let's say, objective basis that can lead to very strong emotional ties? And that's being systematically destroyed, of course, by society, but that's another issue entirely.
Oh man, honestly, I don't know if I'm the person to say
Yeah.
because I don't know.
Well, it's because
I've
you mentioned it. Yeah, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, that's kind of like something that I've observed in like why young women are drawn to like fictional relationships, and I think
Mm-hmm.
those fictional relationships do reflect something that exists in reality, but I can't say whether or not like women are capable of experiencing something like that because like honestly, I am the kind of person who has like one or two close friendships at a time, and they're like long-term friendships, so I
Yeah.
can't really like I don't know.
Yeah. And default, did you sense that growing up, or do you feel that the sort of BAP thesis is not? Do you think it's valid, or do you? Yeah, I know. Yeah.
I mean, I think everyone's relationships are sort of under attack right now,
Yeah.
and that becomes really obvious when you talk to people who are from like the odd, like well-adjusted small town or something,
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
right? Like my significant other is very very well adjusted and like grew up somewhere where he has strong connections from his hometown and from college and from high school and then in work, and like that's like a very I think that's very exceptional.
Right.
You
Right.
don't I think most people are like alienated from are alienated from forming these relationships to say so. Yeah, I think it's awful for men. I think that we do say that these strong male bonds are gay or somehow predatory,
Right.
or we try to brand them or commodify them in some way.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I also think like real sisterhood has been diminished, and I
Really?
think
Yeah.
yeah, and I think part of that is like we don't let women age. We sort of women sort of linger in the maiden
I
phase.
was talking about this Nina Power. Yes. Yeah. You go. Go.
Yeah,
Go. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and yeah, and I've spoken to Nina about this as well. It's like you're just not allowed to like move on, right?
Yeah.
And
Right.
that
Yeah.
limits it creates like weird tension. I know a lot of um, like I feel like uh, there's a lot of tension between like women who accept that they're moving into the mother phase and women who stay in the maiden phase. Um, I mean, there's information doesn't get passed down between these phases either.
Yes.
Little crone
Yes.
has been totally made invisible. There's a lot wrong.
So true.
Older women are made invisible. That is true. I think older men are made invisible, but that's different. I mean, older men can still like claw out of that through power and success, and but like there's a lot of older dudes who also experience that. But I feel like there still could be a role for that. But when it comes to older women, I mean, the crone phase, like the wisdom of older women has sort of been. I mean, and let's like there's also I would say the negative archetypal aspect of it of the crone. There's the longhouse mommy, that is the negative aspect. But when it comes to young women being educated by older women, I mean, it seems that. But why is that in both of your experiences? Do you feel that perhaps is it that the society devalues older women, or do you feel that the young girl, the sort of the exuberance of youth and sexiness, that is overcoded, or do you feel that perhaps maybe it's really that young women don't seek out that advice from older women the way
I
that
mean,
yeah,
it's all of it, right? Like,
right,
what we see now is like the bureaucratic devouring mother, which is
right,
like the
Right.
Nina Jankowicz,
yeah,
who simultaneously is
Right.
pushing herself in the maiden phase by singing these like inane Harry Potter songs, right? They're obsessed with Hamilton. They don't know how to adult, but they like
yeah,
assert this like
millennial,
administrative
yeah,
control, right? And it's, I mean, it's like that's the best we've got for the mother, right? And that's
Right.
and so it's because I mean everybody knows that um, that if you aren't young, you and if there isn't a chance that you're fuckable, then you're worthless as a
oh
woman,
yeah.
and everybody knoes that, and we have
But
not
even
reckoned with
men
that.
though nowadays, though I would say I don't know, like that's I have to
I don't
defend the
know, Gio.
boys.
Like, I'll say like, people are much kinder to the unfuckable man with charisma, right? Than
Mm,
the
mm.
truly like abject. But the abject woman is rare, right?
Right, right,
Mm-hmm.
right. Which I think it goes back to the femcel thing. But and I want to get Helena in this. Before that, I wanted to read you. Let me see if I could find it. Because I posted this to Crooner when we were doing our content minded. This is a cap from I believe Atrazine Graper shared this. This is a cap about it's back. This is so dated, by the way. This is from the Forever Alone subreddit. This is from 2012.
Oh man.
Yeah. Here we go. Oh yeah. So let's see if I have an option to share it. Actually, I think I have an option to share it. Let's see here. Share. Slides. Oh yeah. Anyways, I'll just read it to you. There's an ongoing half-serious claim in our culture that men think about sex all the time, every 17 seconds or so. That may be true for some guys, but not forever alone. After a while, you stop being able to think about sex, or at least the way that other people do. You think about it abstractly, and watching other people perform a stylized version of it alone in your room, while you use your hand to joylessly complete a sad shadow of the biological imperative. But you stop being able to imagine sex as something you could be a part of. You see women in the springtime, her midriff perking out between the soft cotton of a shirt and the rougher waist of a pair of jeans. You start to imagine her naked, constructing a fantasy in detail, the way her breasts would sit against her chest, the soft dow and absence thereof on her pubic area, and then you try to insert yourself into her presence, and the fantasy crumbles to dust under the weight of the abstract absurdity. You know there's no chance of events, no course of action that could lead to that ill-defined imaginary room where the two of you would meet in act of carnal congress. There's no way to there from where you are. It's even in an alternative universe, in an inconceivable one. It's like trying to imagine a world where everyone else is the same except for elephants floating around like helium balloons and having to anchor them by their trunks. An inherently absurd thought. That's the idea of you and her being intimate. So instead, you look away from that tiny sliver of skin, trying to keep your face from contorting in pain and bitterness, where other men might smile at her, you don't. Because your smile sucks, and you suck, and you're forever alone. So brutal. I've actually been in that situation, but I think that it goes to, the commonality between the capacity to imagine your own subjectivity within the realm of that perfect union with a desired person. But I wonder, is it different for women than it is for men? Because I think we all know, there's much to explore still, but we all know about, the incel and the lack of, being desirable as a man and so forth. But is that what I just described to you? That pretty much does accurately depict the unfuckable man towards a beautiful woman. You can't even envision yourself with that woman.
We say every woman has sexual value is sort of the cultural narrative. That's blatantly untrue. Imagine being conditioned to think that, and then you so much as look at a guy and he responds with disgust, or he just looks right through you. How are you supposed to react to that? But the cultural narrative is the most beautiful you'll ever be is at 16, but at 16 you're like, you're fat, have a big nose and buck teeth, right?
And what do you think of that, Helena? Yeah.
I'm sure it would sound extremely crazy to some of the men listening or watching, but as a teenager, that would have been relatable.
No!
I'm sorry. I know that's gonna really upset people, but first of all, you haven't seen pictures of me from high school. I looked like a mutant. I did not look anything like I look now. Completely unrecognizable, different people, fat, acne. So yeah. That's how it is. But I think there's a difference in female psychology where it doesn't take that same kind of fatalistic incel route, where I think for me it's it was easier for me to just kind of float off into a fantasy world where it's I'm thinking about, well, okay, to give an example, maybe I'll see an attractive guy or something as a teenager, and I have that initial attraction, and then I have that obliterating shame reaction. And what I do with that, instead of just saying like, oh, I can never think about that guy again, is I'll find a way to incorporate that into my fantasy of like the fanfic and the slash and stuff. So I can take whatever theme of that man that I found attractive. Maybe it's like he's, I don't know, athletic or like whatever, something that I found attractive in that man, or like a body part that I found attractive, whatever, and incorporate that into my fantasy. And then that's my outlet for experiencing that attraction. But
so
I would
you became
not
the boyfriend you could never have, in other words. Is that
real? And like you'll see these like MTFs actually admit to that, being like, oh well, I used to be an incel and then I got radicalized, or I got de-radicalized, and now I'm
then
trans.
I went on R9K and
And
every character I've ever written has been based on someone I'm fixated on that I'll never have, you know?
Yeah.
And I mean, like, as a teenager, like, I was genuinely like a spurg. Like I was not like the girl who like is just quiet reading her book and gets asked out by some guy. Like I was literally like the girl that like guys would completely avoid and like not talk to. And I was the
holy
joke.
Crap.
I was the joke. Like there was this game that people would play where it was like you would write a time on someone's hand. So like you'd be like 2:30 or whatever. And on the inside you would write someone's name. And the joke was like that you would write like the most embarrassing, ugliest person's name that then that person would have to ask out at that time.
Oh my God.
And then the person would have to ask them out, and then people would crowd around to watch, like, oh, are they going to actually ask them out at 2:30? And like, I was that name. Like, I was
going to Helena.
Like,
oh,
yeah. So,
oh man,
definitely.
I was the fat kid growing up in my school. That was my role. But like,
it's rough.
Yeah, it is. Well, it is like nobody made it. I was surprisingly immune from bullying, though. I maybe because I knew everybody, but like. I grew up in a pretty sizable elementary and then high school. Like I had a lot of people, like 5 classes from my elementary alone went to my high school. But like I don't know why I didn't experience. Like I experienced some bullying. Maybe they were talking about me behind my back. But like I mean, no, I managed to weirdly avoid that for some reason. Instead, I was a nomad. Like I would hang out with the popular kids and I would hang out with the less popular kids, and then it was like. But I know what you mean though. When you're like, when it came to women though, I mean, I was like, I wasn't recognized whatsoever. Like essentially I was in love with the same woman since we were basically little kids. I grew up with this woman, and I hope she'll probably be listening to this actually. But for one reason or another, we just drifted apart. It would never work out. And like, you know, when you're a kid and it's like people envision you together. They're like, oh, Jill's going to end up with one day. I just sense it, right? Like but that never happened because of whatever, I had my own journey and I had my own problems in school. But no, yeah, it was only until high school I started seriously thinking about, my role in things. But when it comes to, like, it seems that we're focusing on young women, and we know about like older women who like, are mothers or whatever, but it seems like what goes unmentioned is what is nowadays the older millennial woman in her late 20s, early 30s, late 30s. The Nina Jankowicz millennial woman. Like, it seems like that now. I mean, in one end, it is a subjective scrutiny because these are the people, this is the demographic writing the think pieces. But in terms of them analyzing themselves, we're talking a lot about like, young men and young women. But what about like older millennial men and women that are in their 30s? Like, it seems like that middle period of life goes unmentioned. And like, I don't know, it seems like that's a walled off zone in a way. Like, maybe I could be wrong.
I think you're right. I mean, it's really weird because I was watching, I binge watched Will and Grace, and it's in season 1, they're all 30, right? And there's this real sort of delineation, like they are adults, they don't like kids are gross, right? But that seemed to have flipped, right, as we get into the deeper into the 2000s. It becomes like supplanted with I'm afraid of adulting, right, instead of a disgust of kids, which I think is like a really interesting sort of like perception change. And what continues there is like in Will and Grace, they're constantly having sexual partners. Same with Friends, right? Which has the same sort of trope.
Same a little bit with Seinfeld. Yeah. Melrose
like,
Place, you know.
Right. It's just like this revolving door of sex partners. And I think that, you know, for some people, for like a certain type of coastal upper middle class person, that's still true. For most people,
that's not true.
For most, absolutely not.
Girls
I mean,
was the ground zero of this, was it not? Girls, like, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, in Girls, like Lena Dunham is, I mean, that was the joke of Girls, right? That Lena Dunham's character, Hannah, was sleeping with men who, especially in New York, you couldn't pay to wear the bag over her head. I mean, that's just how it is.
Through a glory hole.
You really got to edit. I don't know what's going on with me today. Going off.
Yeah, man. Oh, man. Yeah, I love it. But yeah, so... Yeah, it seems like the sort of old, like even nowadays, it seems like in commercials and in media and in film, they're all Gen Xers. The millennial is gone. It's either like the Zoomer Euphoria, Stranger Things, or it's like Gen Xers in Hallmark movies. Millennials, late 20s, early 30s, they're gone. They're erased. We're gone. We are the occluded generation in some ways. Do you feel like that, Helena? Like as you approach you're a Zoomer, are you not? Like you're so weird. You're like that middle Zoomer and millennial.
Yeah, I'm on the cusp, but I identify definitely more with like the Zoomer mindset than I do with like the millennial. But I don't know, maybe it's because like the millennials are really the first generation that was really the product of a lot of this like ideology that came out of the second half of the 20th century.
Yes.
And there's a lot of problems there, and maybe like our society just can't reckon with that, so we just kind of like brush it under the rug and just ignore it.
And do you feel that like as a Zoomer that you don't have the same like, I mean, I guess you have a different nostalgia because the nostalgia machine on the internet, on the millennial and Zoomer internet is very powerful, but you don't have the same relation to nostalgia and to older forms of media that I guess millennials do. Like, I mean, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like I remember being in like middle school and seeing kind of like on millennial internet, like, oh, all this stuff about like, I'm a 90s kid and blah, blah, blah. But we don't really have that as Zoomers. Like you don't really see like, oh, I'm a 2000s kid.
Yeah.
That just doesn't really exist to the same degree.
It's starting to, like, I remember like Zoomers listening to the, you know, like Korn and Job for a Cowboy and Breaking Benjamin. I'm like, I said this to Turkey Tom on stream once. I'm like, bro, that Breaking Benjamin album came out when I was in high school. Like, you know, I feel like an old man now, but like, it's, I guess like, yeah, there is, they say the 90s are coming back, but yeah.
Yeah, there's just a lot of like stagnation, obviously, in like the culture and in like the art that we produce. Like, for example, I guess My Chemical Romance is like doing some kind of like reunion tour or something. And my friend went and she just said it was like embarrassing old, like 40-year-old drunk men just like getting wasted and horribly singing their songs and that it wasn't good. But you have like all these little Zoomers on TikTok, like these 14-year-old like Zoomers, and they have like the scene hair from back in the day. And they're posting about My Chemical Romance and how they're like, oh my God, my MCR tickets. And they're like, there's
I had a very disturbing situation where someone was trying to correct me on what happened in that era. And they're like, no, we were just kids when this was happening.
Yeah.
And I was like, you were a kid.
Yeah.
I remember it from the perspective of an adult. And it was the first time that it ever happened to me. And it like kind of made me realize like I do want to age and move on, right? Like seeing people misunderstand things I experienced as a 21-year-old, for example, has been like disturbing. So like not disturbing, but just sort of like it kind of like it does ground you in a weird way.
Because what is there to look forward to? I think that is like when it comes, I mean, I guess this is always the perennial issue of cultural creation and aesthetic exploration, and what is left to be had. I feel like, I mean, Helena, you talked about this as well. Both of you actually have talked about this element of, you know, I can't identify with the cultural products that are created for me, but rather, it's like I sort of have to create my own sense of identity. That, you know, that, I mean, it's this weird way in which I mean, lastly, I think I should talk about the internet thing. I know Default, you have to go, but maybe Helena, if you could stay a little bit longer. I don't know.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So then I'll ask Default, and then I know you have to go. The sort of element of the sort of virtuality of being on the internet, sort of like, especially the alienation towards one's body. That's very powerful. You write about this a lot. And do you feel that, I mean, with Zoomers, they're fully immersed in this, but do you feel that perhaps maybe we're making too much of it and we should really just touch grass? Or is it true that the way that we experience intersubjectivity with each other has been so fundamentally imploded by these online relations and by the way in which we even view the body itself, right? Like that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's people who just don't understand any other way of existing at this point.
Yeah.
There's an interesting quote. It was very beautifully written, that I found in like somebody's thesis about pseudonymity. That it was something about like, it was like about the creation of the author, and like there was no role of the author before the printing press, and I think there's something to that, right? Like there's so many of these roles that have been created by the internet, and those are the only lenses through which people know how to understand each other. I mean, so I think for people, you know, for iPad kids, it's like asking someone to conceive of themselves without language. It's just impossible. You can't do that.
Right.
You don't know how. And what would that deconditioning look like? You can't do it.
Yeah, there have been artists who have attempted that type of content. I mean, Byers, for instance. But that, yeah, it's an impossible task in a lot of ways, because like Heidegger is right. Language is the house of being, and yeah, it's so.